46. As you're getting there, let me just ask this kind of starter question. What frightens you the most? Really? Nobody's frightened of any.
Probably not being able to find anybody that you can share common ground with.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Like today at the Radmore store, I saw this guy in there that he looked familiar. And I knew just by looking at him, he graduated from Temple High School in 1965.
Wow.
And his first name was Jerry, but I couldn't recall his last name.
Wow. Probably better than I would have done.
But I'm almost sure he graduated that year. That's been, 50 years ago now.
Yeah.
Or 40, 55 years ago.
All right. So yeah, being isolated, kind of being on your own and not having anybody that's kind of like you to hang out with. All right. What else?
I had someone I was talking to today tell me it was the fear of the unknown was their biggest fear.
That's a big fear, fear of the unknown. That's why change is so hard. That's why there's so much stress in change. If you study change management, it's not so much what will happen or even what might happen. It's the fact that you don't know. And it's the unknown that causes the greatest stress and change. So fear of the unknown. Anybody else? Sometimes we're afraid of things that we know can happen, but sometimes we're afraid of things because we have no control over, right? I've got one of my counselors who, this ice storm on top of COVID, on top of, I'm sure, other things in her life, just really mentally messed with her mind. She's seeing counseling right now. It really affected her that much. That she couldn't work, and she just had an overwhelming fear. And I don't think it was so much the ice storm itself as the sense of hopelessness, the sense of I have no control over what's happening.
Yeah.
And so
she couldn't get out. She couldn't do anything about it.
she had to go stay some nights in a home because it took them a long time to get power back to her area. And so that really rocked her world. So sometimes it's things that we just we can't control cause us fear. And sometimes fear is just irrational, right? I have a fear of heights. And it doesn't have to be really high. And it's an irrational fear, I remember when I was working for a guy that was a contractor in our church, and I was a teen. And I remember we were remodeling the house, and I remember him putting me up on the walls to hold the I forget what they call the support for the roof, to hold all that together. Yeah, the rafters, so he could get them all nailed in. And I just remember I was holding, everything was fine, and all of a sudden I realized I'm up, and then all of a sudden my knees started shaking, and he came over and took it, and then I got settled and I held it back up. But it was an irrational fear. Even if I fell, it wasn't like I was 3 or 4 stories up. So sometimes we're fearful for no reason at all. And so it kind of wants to think about that as we go through peace. God provides peace, and it's part of our testimony when we live out that peace. It's not just the fact that we study and we understand that God should provide peace. It's not just the fact that we understand why we should have peace, but we study this so that we really live with peace in our lives, because that's part of our testimony to the world. When we act contrary to others, because we have a different hope, a different focus. So I want us to look at that as we go through today's scriptures. And so Psalms 46.
46. Okay.
And verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. And I just want to stop right there. Because so many times we read through these Psalms and we don't break them apart and really think about it. We are being told what God is like in this first verse. We are being told God is revealing himself to us in this first verse. So as you read this first verse, what portrait of God emerges to you?
I think his love for us is concern.
Okay. He is our strength. He is our refuge, right? Okay. His concern. What else?
He's there no matter what.
Okay.
He is.
His presence.
I just get this overwhelming sense of just being nurtured, just this protective covering almost. I mean, I don't know. When I read this, that's where my mind
Kind
goes.
of like you think about your grandmother when they hug you, you know, that big hug, you feel secure.
I
Yeah.
don't know why I picture like big, like wings that, you know, just being sheltered and kind of hidden. And,
Right. Other places he does do imagery of birds, doesn't he? And how the mother birds put the wings around the chicks to protect them. So one is his presence. How does God's presence affect or cause us to have peace?
He's not a far off God. He's there with us, going, you know.
Okay. Yeah, think about the things we just said cause us not to have peace or that we fear, right? Sometimes it's the unknown, but God's there and he knows and he's present. Sometimes it's the possible outcomes, but God's there and he knows those outcomes and he's present. So God's presence, the fact that there is nothing that we go through or will go through that God isn't already aware of and present. And one of the other things we see there is what? He's our refuge and our strength. He's the one that takes care of that. It doesn't matter how strong I am or weak. It doesn't matter how mentally sharp I am or not. It doesn't matter how physically strengthened I am or not. He is the one that provides the refuge. He is the one that provides the strength, and he's present to do that. And so that should bring us peace. And so we learn a lot about God, even just in the first verse of this psalm. Somebody had a point in.
I like to go through and say, God, you were there when, and name things I went through to really remind me that he's been there with me through everything I've gone through. He's the only one that was there when I was born. Every tragedy, every good time, and then when I die and take my last breath, he'll be right there, you know.
That's right. Okay, so let's go on to verses 2 and 3, and I want you to think what images come to mind as we read these. Therefore, now when there's a therefore, you have to stop and ask, why is the therefore? You know, well, what's the purpose of there? Therefore points back to what was previously said. So because God's present, because he's caring, because he's our refuge and our strength, he's the one that does it. So because of all that, we will not fear, though the earth should change, and though the mountains slip into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains quake at its swelling pride. Therefore, because of that, what imagery is used, and what do you think of? What comes to your mind as you read those verses?
I mean, that almost sounds like end times.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, or complete destruction, or it doesn't have to be the end times. It could be an earthquake, or it could be
Right.
some kind of natural disaster. Could even have been this last ice storm. You know, I mean, if that's what's got you really worried.
Yeah, he uses things that are over the top, doesn't he? He's not using something that we really face all the time, because if he's the one that provides peace in these over the top situations,
Right.
You know, I mean, can you imagine a mountain crumbling and completely disappearing into the sea? You know, can you imagine that?
Maybe that's what we feel like.
Better not be
sometimes,
too
though,
close.
We feel like everything's crumbling around us.
Right. And so whether that's what we feel like or what we really have, I mean, if you can have peace in those situations, then you should have peace in any other situation. Can you imagine the waters roar and foam?
Right.
And you just you can just think of and see pictures. I'm sure you've seen images on of floods and tsunamis and how they come in and just other destruction, other power of something like that. And yet, because he's present, because he cares, because he's the refuge and he's the strength and not our own abilities, we can have peace. And so the imagery here is over the top to help us. So let's look at 4 and 5. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy dwelling place of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She will not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. Well, so he's talking about the city of God here. And when he talks about the city of God, at the time this was written, he's probably referring to Jerusalem. Okay. That's where the temple was. That's where you went to meet with God. That was where God, it was his city, it's where he resided. Now, they knew that he wasn't limited to that. But it was really kind of the city he established with the people he established. Mm-hmm. And so when we see that, that's what we're thinking of as the psalmist is thinking of. And one of the unique aspects of Jerusalem is, unlike some of the other major cities, Babylon, Nineveh, who have large rivers who protect them, who in a time of siege would provide water, you don't find that in Jerusalem. They don't have that advantage, that strategic advantage of some of the other great fortified cities. But what do they have that the other cities don't have?
God.
Yeah.
So even an insurmountable, because at those times, that was not desirable to not have water like you're talking about.
Right.
You almost didn't build a city like that, really.
Well, many times, if you study sieges and you study, so many times, it's not necessarily you always breach the walls.
Right.
It's you starve the people out.
Mm-hmm.
Stop the water.
And water is a big piece of that.
Very undesirable for that to happen.
And so when you're thinking of, wow, we don't have this, but yet we have something better. No. We don't have the natural resources here, but we have God's resources. We have his strength. We have his presence.
And many of the battles were like that, where it looked hopeless.
Yeah.
And if they turned to him, it was a whole different scenario.
Right. And so that turning then, we can have peace. It should bring us peace. There's a question I think is good. What aspect of the city of God seems most inviting to you? Read that again, 4 and 5, and say, what is the most inviting aspect of it to you?
God's going to be there.
Okay, he's in the middle of it, right? All right. Any others? Won't be moved. Nothing will happen that God doesn't allow.
God's going to help her. He's going to help the city. He's going to help the people.
Right? God's the one that's going to do it. We don't have to figure it out. We can have peace because we don't have to figure it all out. And so there are many aspects. And so when we are facing times of stress, these are good verses to go back and review and say, wait a minute, why am I stressed? God's in control of this. God has this. If the worst thing that's in my mind happens and it's God's will, then I don't have to stress over it. If the worst thing that happens, think about that. If the worst thing that happens that I can think of happens, and yet God has sovereignly allowed it and has a purpose for it, then why would I want to fight it?
That's actually a de-stressor for me, is to think, okay, worst case scenario. You go to that and you think, I can handle that with God. I can handle that.
But, so many times we say, well, what's the worst case scenario here? I die. But then you start thinking about it. Oh, wait a minute. I go spend eternity where my real home is, well, that's not such a bad option. Not that I'm going to go out and seek it because if it's not God's will, but if that's what God's will is in this situation, and I consider that the worst case scenario, that's a pretty good scenario. That's kind of what Paul says, isn't it? Oh man, I desire to go and be with God in heaven, but I know He's got a purpose for me here, so I'm going to remain. But man, my heart is take me out. I'm ready. Bring me home. But I'm going to be faithful to the purpose. And so you think through that, and that brings you peace. It says that God is our fortress. Verses 7 and 11, but I'm just going to read 7 because it's repeated. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. Not a stronghold, a fortress. It's a fortified place that you can go to that's defensive, gives you advantages, gives you protection. And so when you think of that, and you think of God as our fortress, He's the one we turn to. He's the one we go to for our protection, for our advantages, He's the one in control. And so there really is a lot of similarities here between a fortress and going to God. Only God is not movable. All right, let's look at 6 through 10. The nations made an uproar, the kingdoms tottered. He raised his voice, the earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. Come, behold the works of the Lord, who has wrought desolations in the earth. He makes wars to cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and cuts the spear in two. He burns the chariots with fire. Cease striving and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. So what active role, who takes the active role of taking care of these situations that we want to worry about?
God does.
Yeah, God does. And so we see these, and he gives some examples that would have made a lot more sense in that time, but I think we can make sense out of them. And it talks about the nations made an uproar. The nations clamored. The nations are coming to destroy these strong nations. He says, what? He simply raised his voice. And he says, and he defeated the nations. No, he doesn't say he defeated the nations. Notice he goes, and God raised his voice and the whole earth just melted. These nations, they're nothing. They're nothing. They look strong, but they're nothing. You don't have to lose your peace over it. This situation is nothing compared to God. And come behold the works of the Lord, who has wrought desolations in the earth. He makes wars to cease. He breaks the bow. He breaks all the tools. Burns the chariot. And then we get to verse 10. And I think this is where I think we need to close. So if God's doing all that, if our peace comes because God is present, God is caring, God is the source of the refuge and the strength and the source of the solution, and He's all powerful, that nothing is beyond Him, and He gives that through all these nations come, no big deal. He just melts the whole earth out from under Him. None of these situations that seem so big to us are a big deal to Him. Then what's our role? If He's the one doing all the work, what's our role?
Rejoice.
Okay, rejoice.
Trust Him.
Be still.
Have faith.
What does it say in verse 10?
Be still and know that I am God.
Be still, or mine says cease striving. Now, why is that so hard? It sounds like that should be something that should be very easy to do. Say, I'm facing an issue and this is hard and I just need to calm down and cease striving. Stop working so hard at it.
Well, it's kind of like one of those preachers was talking about today. It was a whole series of different guys on pretty much the same topic, but it's like because you don't really know the word. Because like if I really had known, and I've totally skipped over the fact that God could raise His voice and melt the earth, but why would I want to raise my voice from that point on? Why would there even be a need for me to raise my voice? Don't let God raise his voice. That's all I got to say. And so when you put it into perspective from God's word, and it's like one of the preachers said, it kind of hit me right in the heart. You don't know God's word then. And I was like, ouch, stop preaching to me up from the radio from a million miles away.
Yeah, I mean, he says, cease striving, stop working so hard at all that. We have this religion so many times where we think we have to work so hard at it. And we put all these requirements and all this hard work, and somehow we think, and God just constantly says, I didn't create you to have to do that. Stop. Calm down. Just trust me. Put your trust in me instead of you trying to work so hard for this. And then you live a peaceful life. Now, not many of us live peaceful lives, do we? We like to continue to strive. I think some of us because we don't know or don't remember God's word in the middle of some of these conflicts.
Right.
I think some of it is we fall back into that. I want to pull myself up by my own bootstraps. I want to be seen as strong and look at me. I can overcome.
Tough and grit and all that good stuff.
And then it's not about God at all, is it?
Right.
No wonder God says, "Cool, go for it."
Yeah, no wonder we fall
How's
flat.
that working for you?
No wonder we fall flat on our faces and get even more stressed out.
Yeah. He says, cease striving, and that's a key word. It's not just cease striving. It's cease striving and know that I am God. Mm-hmm. Know that I am in control. Know that I have the power. Know that I have the knowledge. Know that I'm God. And implied in that is put your trust and your faith in me. It may not look like it today, but I am in control of it all. And one day, I'll be exalted among all the nations. You know, how in the world is that going to happen? We can't even exalt him among our nation anymore. But he says, stop worrying about it.
Yeah, he's like, I'll do that.
He says, I got this.
I'm going to do that. Not
I don't need your help.
You don't need to exalt me above the nations or nothing.
I don't need you running around with your hair on fire worried about what this politician says or this people want to do or that people want to do. Stop and trust me. I've already told you I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Just trust me. Show your faith in your actions. Your actions don't save you, but your actions show what's in your heart. And so we should be living a life of peace, no matter what's going on. Storms shouldn't freak us out. Changes of politicians and policy shouldn't break. It may break our hearts, but it shouldn't freak us out.
No. And
have us, the world is ending. Well, great, end the world, because I know the end story. I've read the end of the book, and we need to demonstrate. Our witness many times is merely our demonstration of how we live out.
Yeah, I love how Joyce Meyer puts it into perspective, and it's not about a politician or one side or the other. She says, once every tongue or whatever on the earth has heard the word, that will herald the end times. So not everybody's heard yet. So she said, if you want Jesus to come back quicker, she said that should encourage you to get out there and evangelize
and share
it.
He will bring it to us.
It has nothing to do with those nations or a government or a politician or anybody.
They have no power. If he can melt the earth, who cares?
By raising his voice,
So, all right. Any other thoughts, comments? All right. So let's get to prayer requests. I didn't bring the paper in here, but we'll just share them tonight.
You remember June.
Okay.
She just doesn't feel very well at all.
Yeah. Okay.
And the Spradley family from down in Houston, my cousin's grandson passed away of COVID. Well, he had COVID, then he got pneumonia, and they had to put him on a ventilator, and his body just stepped out.
Oh, man.
He was only 20.
Whoa.
20. But he had health issues all of his life. From the time he was born.
And pneumonia right after COVID would be a
Right.
Tough thing to get through.
Right.
Tough thing.
What others?
Remember your sister.
Okay.
You know, I know she's not getting the spiritual help she needs. And I just pray that somehow it's gonna come about that she can get back in church.
Pray for Mindy.
I think we ought to pray for the veterans in these VA hospitals that have, because of the COVID, they can't have visitors, they can't go in the pass, they can't even leave the room. The only time they can leave the room is when they take a shower.
Right.
They don't shower every day, maybe 3 times a week, which is, if you shower every day, you're just gonna dry your skin out. So I mean, we just showered twice a week.
And
And
when he was up there, it was
Right.
twice a week.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so many in isolation.
Yeah, not just VA, but even in all these others.
And all the
Nursing
nursing homes,
Yeah.
assisted living,
Yeah.
all that.
Yep.
Oh, and pray for Rachel too. She left that job, I'm not sure when all the ice and stuff happened, and she's working at a nursing home that's closer to where she lives.
Okay.
Nice.
She said, if something happens to my car, I can still walk to work.
Yeah.
Good, good.
Yeah. Instead of having to drive.
Instead, you know, she was driving to Gatesville
Yeah.
or to Round Rock
Right.
or, you know, Carpus Cove was one of the jobs she had to do.
Yeah.
And they don't get paid for any of that. They don't get paid till they get to the house.
Wow.
Goodness.
Well, I didn't know that.
They don't get paid until they walk in the door.
Mm.
From then till the time they leave.
Right.
But they don't get paid for their mileage or
Ooh.
any of that
That's
stuff.
ridiculous.
Well, that'd make that one that used to come to see my grandpa out in on East Lake, way above Burnett. That would have made that because she did that whole thing out there. Whoa.
All
And
right.
some places
Rachel.
do pay mileage,
Wow.
but some don't.
Okay. So we'll pray for Rachel.
Peggy.
Peggy.
Yeah.
Yep. We'll be praying for Peggy. Ramona and Andy.
Yeah,
Nice
today is
thing in a long
Ramona's
time.
birthday.
It's gonna be hard to be